The rain arrived long before the wagons. It rolled down the black mountains in endless silver lines, washing dirt from broken stones and filling every crack in the old village road. The wind carried the smell of wet pine, smoke, and frightened horses. Wooden wheels groaned somewhere beyond the fog, slow and heavy, like something dragging the past behind it. Most villagers closed their doors. When slave traders traveled through the borderlands, people learned not to look. Looking meant remembering. Remembering meant guilt. Only one light still burned at the edge of the village. A small cottage stood beside a narrow river, its windows glowing with warm golden fire. Bundles of drying herbs hung beneath the roof, moving gently in the cold wind. Inside, Elara crushed fresh leaves into a wooden bowl. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. The old woman beside her smiled. "You always work through storms." Elara continued mixing the medicine. "Storms don't wait for pain to disappear." The old woman laughed softly. "Neither do you." Before Elara could answer, a sharp crack echoed outside. Then another. Not thunder. A whip. The horses became restless. Children cried. Someone shouted orders. Elara placed the bowl on the table. Without thinking, she reached for her cloak. The old woman looked toward the door. "Don't." Elara paused. "They'll leave soon." Another cry followed. Smaller this time. Younger. Almost too weak to be heard beneath the rain. Elara opened the door. Cold wind rushed inside. Outside, 6 large wagons stood in the muddy road. Iron cages filled the back of each one. Some carried adults with empty eyes. Others carried children so quiet they looked like forgotten dolls. Heavy chains dragged through the mud. Nobody spoke. Even crying required hope. At the front stood a broad man wearing wolf fur stained with old blood. Slave trader. His smile never reached his eyes. He noticed Elara watching. Village healer. She didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the small house. "I have something broken." 2 guards climbed from the last wagon. One carried a soaked blanket. Instead of setting it down carefully, he threw it onto the wooden porch. The bundle landed with a dull sound. No movement, no cry, only silence. The trader wiped rain from his beard. "Worthless little thing." One guard laughed. "Born wrong." The pack threw him away. Another spat into the mud. "Cursed blood." The trader shrugged. "If you want him, keep him. If not." He looked toward the river. "The water will finish the job." Elara ignored every word. She knelt beside the blanket. Slowly she pulled back the wet cloth. A tiny wolf pup stared back at her. One ear bent awkwardly against his head. His left leg twisted unnaturally beneath him. Thin scratches covered his pale skin. Silver eyes struggled to stay open. His tiny body shook violently from fever. But what caught Elara's attention was something else. Only a few feet away, another child sat inside an iron cage. The little pup wasn't looking at her. He wasn't trying to save himself. Despite the fever, despite the pain, despite barely breathing. His small hand stretched toward the frightened child in chains. Trying to comfort someone else. Something inside Elara broke. The trader crossed his arms. "So." She carefully lifted the pup against her chest. His heartbeat was weak. Far too weak. "He needs medicine." "He needs a grave," the trader answered. The guards laughed. One of the chained girls suddenly reached between the bars. "Please." Her voice barely existed. "Don't leave him." Elara looked around. There were children everywhere. Tiny hands covered in bruises. Faces too young to understand cruelty. Eyes already too old. The rain washed over them all equally. The trader stepped closer. "If you want the animal, pay." "I don't sell medicine," Elara replied quietly. "You'll sell something." "I won't." His smile disappeared. The whip slowly uncoiled in his hand. The villagers watched from behind closed windows. Nobody moved. Nobody wanted trouble. Elara looked once more at the chained children, then at the frightened pup holding onto her cloak with shaking fingers. The decision came without thought. She walked toward the cages. The guards laughed, until she removed a thin iron key from her healer's belt. "You planning to heal locks?" One quick movement. The first chain fell. A little boy stared at his own wrists. He had forgotten what freedom looked like. Another turn. Second lock opened. A tiny girl stepped backward in disbelief. The trader's face darkened. "What are you doing?" Elara never looked at him. She knelt beside the children. "When I count to 3, run!" The trader roared. The whip cracked through the rain. Before it reached her, the old woman from the cottage appeared carrying a walking stick. It struck the whip aside. "Go!" The children hesitated only a second. Then they ran. Bare feet splashed through mud. Chains dragged behind them until they disappeared into the forest. The trader screamed, "After them!" Guards rushed forward. One collided with a wooden cart. Another stumbled across broken stones. Elara reached for the nearest lantern. For a single quiet heartbeat, everything became still. The frightened pup looked up at her. Their eyes met. She smiled. Then she tipped the lantern over. Oil spread beneath the trader's branding cart. Fire climbed instantly. Orange light exploded into the darkness. The wooden symbols used to mark children as property disappeared beneath hungry flames. Smoke rose toward the rain. Villagers slowly opened their doors. Nobody spoke. The trader stared in disbelief. "My cart!" The fire answered for him. Iron brands glowed bright red before melting into useless metal. Years of fear disappeared inside one growing blaze. The tiny pup buried his face against Elara's shoulder. She could feel him trembling. Not from fear anymore. From exhaustion. The trader stepped toward her. "You'll regret this." She finally met his eyes. "No." Her voice stayed calm. "You will." Thunder rolled across the valley. For the first time, several villagers walked forward and stood beside the healer. One by one. Without words. Without weapons. Simply refusing to move. The trader understood. Tonight was over. He climbed back onto his wagon. Rain hissed against burning wood as the caravan slowly disappeared into the darkness. Only ashes remained. And silence. Elara carried the small pup inside her cottage. She placed him near the fire. Steam rose from his soaked blanket. The old woman carefully examined the twisted leg. It healed badly. Elara dipped a cloth into warm water. She gently cleaned mud from the child's face. Fresh scars appeared beneath the dirt. Small scars. Deliberate scars. Someone had hurt him long before tonight. The pup opened his silver eyes. For a moment he looked terrified. Then his tiny fingers found the edge of Elara's sleeve. He refused to let go. She wrapped another blanket around him. "You don't have to be afraid." No answer came. Only a weak breath. Outside, the rain continued falling over empty roads and cooling ashes. Inside the little cottage, firelight danced across the walls. The old healer quietly watched the sleeping child. Then she looked at Elara. "You know what this means." Elara nodded. "The pack abandoned him." The old woman slowly shook her head. "No." Her eyes rested on the strange silver glow hidden deep inside the child's sleeping gaze. "I think someone wanted the world to believe they did." The wind whispered through the trees. The fire cracked softly. And far away, beyond mountains and kingdoms, an alpha king who had spent years mourning a lost child suddenly woke from sleep with a feeling he could not explain. As if somewhere in the darkness, someone who belonged to him had finally found a home. Morning arrived quietly. The storm that had swallowed the village through the night was gone, leaving behind wet rooftops, muddy paths, and thousands of tiny drops hanging from pine branches like pieces of glass. Sunlight slowly pushed through the clouds. Birds returned. The river flowed peacefully again. It was almost impossible to believe that only hours earlier chains had dragged across these same roads and fire had climbed into the dark sky. Inside the little healer's cottage, everything smelled of herbs and warm bread. Bundles of lavender hung beside dried flowers. Small clay pots filled every wooden shelf. The fireplace crackled softly, filling the room with gentle light. On a simple bed near the window, the tiny wolf pup finally opened his eyes. For several seconds he didn't move. He simply stared at the wooden ceiling, waiting, listening, as if expecting someone to shout, as if expecting another whip. Nothing happened, only birds singing outside. Only the sound of someone quietly grinding medicine nearby. Elara looked up from the table. She smiled. "You're awake." The little pup immediately pulled the blanket tighter around himself. His silver eyes searched every corner of the room, looking for danger, looking for escape, looking for permission to breathe. Elara didn't move closer. She simply poured warm water into a small cup. "I made soup." Silence. "You don't have to talk." Still silence. "You don't even have to trust me." The child lowered his head. A long moment passed before he slowly reached for the cup. His hand shook so badly that warm soup spilled onto the blanket. Without thinking, Elara gently held the bowl steady. The little pup instantly flinched. Not because she hurt him, because someone had touched him kindly. He wasn't used to that. The movement was so small that most people would never notice. Elara noticed. She quietly released the bowl. "I'm sorry." The child stared at her. No adult had ever apologized to him before. He carefully lifted the cup again and drank, very slowly, very carefully, as if every swallow might disappear forever. The old healer watched everything from the doorway. She whispered softly. "He hasn't spoken a single word." Elara nodded. "Not everyone heals the same way." The old woman looked toward the twisted leg. "It will always hurt. So will people." Neither woman spoke after that. Sometimes silence was the gentlest medicine. By afternoon the village already knew. The healer had taken in the abandoned pup. Children gathered outside the cottage. Adults whispered behind fences. Some looked curious. Others looked afraid. One woman carrying firewood stopped near the gate. "You should send him away." Elara continued hanging fresh herbs. "He is staying. He'll bring bad luck. He brought a fever." Another villager crossed his arms. His own pack threw him away. Elara finally looked at him. Then they lost something valuable. The villagers exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody argued again. But nobody smiled either. Fear was older than kindness. The little pup spent the entire afternoon sitting beside the fireplace. He never asked for anything. Never cried. Never wondered. Every loud sound made his shoulders jump. Every shadow made him look toward the door. When Elara placed fresh bread beside him, he stared at it for almost a minute. Then he quietly wrapped half inside a cloth. The old healer noticed. "Why save it?" No answer. Elara gently sat beside him. "Who is it for?" The pup slowly pointed toward the window. Outside a skinny gray bird stood in the rain. Every morning it landed on the same fence looking for crumbs. The little pup carefully broke the bread into tiny pieces and placed them outside. The bird hopped closer, then closer again, until it finally ate from his hand. Elara watched without speaking. A child everyone called cursed still found room to feed something smaller than himself. Something warm settled quietly inside her heart. That evening she decided he deserved something nobody had ever given him. Name. She knelt in front of him. The fire danced behind them. "What did they call you?" "Nothing. Only silence." She wasn't surprised. Maybe he had never owned a name. Maybe people only shouted at him. Maybe he had always been monster, mistake, or burden. Elara looked toward the window. Beyond the cottage stood an old Rowan tree. Strong despite growing from cracked stone. Every winter it survived. Every spring it bloomed again. She smiled. I think you look like someone who survives. The child blinked. Rowan. The word filled the quiet room. That's your name. For a second nothing happened. Then the little pup slowly lifted his head. His frightened silver eyes met hers. The smallest smile appeared. Barely visible. Gone almost instantly. But it was enough. The old healer quietly wiped away tears while pretending to organize herbs. Days slowly became weeks. Life found a gentle rhythm. Every morning Rowan followed Elara through the forest. His twisted leg made him limp, yet he refused help. If she carried heavy baskets, he carried smaller ones. If she gathered flowers, he gathered leaves. If she smiled at a stranger, he watched carefully and tried to copy her. The villagers noticed. One by one, fear slowly became curiosity. An old fisherman dropped apples outside the cottage. A baker quietly left fresh bread every Friday. Children began waving from across the road. Rowan always hid behind Elara at first. But every day he stood a little closer. One afternoon Elara visited an elderly woman living alone beyond the river. She carried medicine. Rowan insisted on carrying the blanket. Halfway there they found a wounded fox trapped beneath fallen branches. The animal growled. Its leg bled badly. Rowan immediately knelt. Elara carefully reached toward the frightened creature. The fox snapped. Rowan didn't pull away. Instead he quietly placed his own piece of bread beside it. The fox stopped growling. Slowly it allowed Elara to treat the wound. Afterward the animal disappeared into the forest. Elara looked down. You always think about someone else first. Rowan simply shrugged. Words still came rarely. But kindness never needed language. That night the full moon rose above the mountains. Silver light covered the village. Everything seemed peaceful. Until Rowan suddenly woke. His breathing became uneven. Tiny lines of glowing silver slowly appeared beneath his skin. They stretched across his hands like ancient roots shining beneath clear water. He looked frightened. Elara rushed beside him. It's all right. She touched his forehead. The light disappeared almost immediately. Only silence remained. Neither of them noticed the oldest woman in the village standing outside the window. The elder stared through the glass. Her face lost all color. She whispered only 3 words. Impossible. Then she walked away. By sunrise whispers traveled faster than birds. People gathered near the well. I heard the cursed child glows. My grandmother spoke of silver markings. They belong to ancient blood. They belong to royal wolves. No. They belong to death. Every conversation reached Rowan's ears. Children notice everything. Even when adults believe they aren't listening. That afternoon he quietly walked away from the village and sat beneath the old rowan tree overlooking the river. His shoulders looked very small beneath the fading sunlight. Elara eventually found him there. She didn't ask why he left. She simply sat beside him. For several minutes neither spoke. The river carried leaves past smooth stones. Wind moved softly through the branches. Finally Elara removed a warm loaf from her basket. She broke it in half. Placed one piece beside him. Nothing else. Rowan stared at the bread. Then slowly broke his own half into 2 smaller pieces. Without hesitation he pushed the larger piece back toward her. She laughed quietly. You're supposed to keep the bigger half. He gently shook his head. His first word since arriving escaped almost like a whisper. You. Only one word. But it carried more trust than 1,000 speeches. Elara felt tears forming before she realized why. No blood connected them. No promise bound them. No ancient magic chose them. Yet somehow, beneath an old tree at the edge of a forgotten village, an abandoned pup and a lonely healer became something much stronger than strangers. They became family. Far beyond the mountains, beneath towering stone walls, an alpha king stood alone inside a silent library. He held a small carved wooden wolf that once belonged to a son he believed lost forever. For reasons he could not explain, he suddenly looked toward the distant borderlands. And somewhere deep inside his heart, hope stirred for the first time in years. The kingdom woke long before sunrise. Golden torches burned along the walls of Blackstone Keep, throwing long shadows across ancient stone corridors. Guards changed shifts without speaking, their polished armor catching the first hints of dawn. Everything inside the palace moved with perfect order. Everything except the man who ruled it. King Kaelin had not slept. He stood alone on the highest balcony, overlooking endless forests that stretched beyond the mountains, disappearing into silver morning mist. Cold wind pulled at his dark cloak. He never noticed. His eyes remained fixed on the eastern horizon. Every sunrise looked the same. Every sunrise carried the same impossible question. What if today was the day? Behind him, heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. General Oren stopped several feet away. "My king." No answer. "The council has assembled." Still silence. Oren had served beside Kaelin for nearly 20 years. He knew better than to rush him. Finally Kaelin spoke. "How many years?" Oren didn't need clarification. 7. 7 winters. 7 springs. 7 summers spent searching roads, villages, battlefields, abandoned ruins, and forgotten caves. 7 years since a tiny newborn disappeared from the royal nursery. 7 years since the kingdom lost its future. Kaelin slowly closed his eyes. "I don't remember his voice." Oren lowered his head. He never had the chance to speak. The Alpha King nodded once. That truth somehow hurt more. Deep inside Blackstone Keep existed a place almost nobody entered. The Royal Library. Thousands of books filled towering shelves that reached toward painted ceilings. Ancient maps rested beside forgotten histories. Dust floated through beams of quiet morning light. But Kaelin never came for the books. He walked directly toward one small wooden shelf hidden in the corner. A carved wolf sat alone beside an unopened storybook. The carving was imperfect. One ear slightly crooked, one leg shorter than the others. A palace craftsman had spent weeks making it. It had been a gift for the prince's first birthday. The birthday never came. Every night Kaelin placed the toy back onto the shelf. Every morning he picked it up again. Not because he believed it changed anything. Because putting it away felt like giving up. His fingers gently traced the rough wood. "You would be taller now." Silence answered. "You would probably hate your lessons." Another silence. "And your mother would pretend to scold you while secretly laughing." His voice almost disappeared. No soldiers ever saw their alpha cry. No council member ever saw weakness. Only empty libraries witnessed grief. The palace doors opened. Council members entered one after another. Rich clothing. Perfect manners. Carefully practiced smiles. They bowed together. "My king." Kaelin placed the wooden wolf back on the shelf. Lord Varys stepped forward. "The Southern Territories request confirmation of the marriage alliance." Another advisor nodded. "The kingdom needs stability. A queen. An heir." The neighboring packs grow impatient. Every sentence sounded reasonable. Every sentence felt like betrayal. Kaelin remained calm. "My kingdom has survived without another marriage." Lord Varys folded his hands. "It survives. But it does not feel secure." Another elder spoke carefully. "The people need certainty. The people need an alpha family." Kaelin looked toward the massive windows. They already had one. Silence spread across the room. Nobody dared answer. Lord Varys finally sighed. "With respect. The lost prince is gone. You must accept reality." For the first time that morning the temperature inside the room seemed to fall. Kaelin slowly turned. Golden alpha eyes met the council leader. Every guard instinctively straightened. Every servant stopped breathing. When Kaelin spoke, his voice stayed quiet. Never tell a father when to stop hoping. Nobody spoke again. The meeting ended without agreement. But as council members walked away, several exchanged hidden glances. Their expressions carried something deeper than frustration. Fear. Far beneath the palace, inside an underground chamber lit by only 3 candles, Lord Varys met secretly with 2 trusted nobles. Stone walls swallowed every whisper. One man nervously asked, "What if the rumors are true?" Varys remained calm. "They're village stories. And if they aren't?" Another silence. Finally Varys answered, "Then we make sure they stay stories." One noble swallowed hard. "The blood markings," Varys interrupted, "were supposed to disappear with the child." No one noticed the young servant hiding outside the doorway. He heard enough. Not everything. Just enough to understand that powerful men feared someone they believed dead. Meanwhile Kaelin rode alone. No royal banners. No escort. Only one black horse moving through endless pine forests. Whenever grief became too heavy, he traveled without destination. The forest never asked questions. Birds didn't offer false comfort. Trees never lied. Hours later he reached a forgotten shrine beside a waterfall. Small wooden wolves hung from ancient branches. Parents tied them there while praying for lost children to return. Kaelin added another carving. The old shrine keeper quietly watched. "You still come. I said I would. Most stop after a year." Kaelin looked toward the rushing water. "I'm not most fathers." The old woman smiled sadly. "No, you aren't." Before leaving she handed him a folded piece of cloth. "A messenger came this morning." Kaelin opened it. Only one sentence appeared. A silver-eyed deformed pup survived abandonment at the eastern border. Nothing more. No name. No proof. No certainty. Just hope. General Oren would have dismissed it. The council certainly would. But Kaelin couldn't. His fingers tightened around the message. The shrine keeper noticed. "You've received hundreds like that." "I know. And everyone broke your heart." "I know. Then why keep searching?" Kaelin watched sunlight dance across moving water. "Because one day, one of them won't be wrong." Night returned before he reached the palace. Rain clouds gathered again. Inside the royal dining hall dozens of servants prepared a feast. No guests laughed. No music played. Long tables felt empty despite their size. Kaelin barely touched his food. His attention drifted toward the folded message resting beside his plate. Silver-eyed, deformed, abandoned. 3 details repeated endlessly inside his mind. A small memory surfaced. Years ago, just after the prince was born, the royal physician smiled. "He has unusual eyes." His wife had laughed softly. "They shine like moonlight." Kaelin closed his eyes. For one impossible second he almost heard her voice again. Then it vanished. Later that night Oren entered carrying fresh reports. "My king." Kaelin looked up. "We questioned the messenger. And the child exists." A long silence followed. "The villagers call him cursed. They say he limps. They say a healer took him in." Kaelin slowly stood. Oren immediately understood. "No, we don't know enough." Kaelin picked up his travel cloak. "If there is even the smallest chance." "My king." "If that child belongs to another family." Kaelin paused. His answer came quietly. "Then I will leave knowing someone loved him. And if he belongs to no one?" His golden eyes lifted toward the storm outside. "Then I refuse to let him grow up believing he was abandoned by the world." Thunder echoed across the mountains. Far away, inside a tiny healer's cottage, little Rowan slept peacefully beside a warm fire. His small hand rested against the carved wooden bird Elara had made for him that afternoon. As moonlight entered through the window, faint silver markings shimmered beneath his skin for only a heartbeat before disappearing again. Neither Rowan nor Elara noticed. But somewhere beyond forests and rivers, An alpha king had already begun riding toward destiny. And for the first time in 7 years, hope traveled beside him. Morning arrived wrapped in mist. The border village seemed to disappear beneath pale clouds drifting between the pine trees, leaving only the sound of flowing water and distant birds breaking the silence. Nothing dramatic happened. No soldiers marched through the streets. No wolves howled from the mountains. No storms shook the earth. And somehow that quiet felt stranger than danger. Elara liked mornings like this. People revealed themselves when the world became quiet. She carried 2 wooden buckets toward the river while Rowan limped carefully beside her, holding a small basket filled with fresh herbs. His steps were uneven. One foot always landed a little slower than the other. Yet he never complained. Every few moments he looked toward Elara, making sure she was still there. She always was. At the riverbank she knelt beside the water and began washing bundles of healing roots. Rowan sat nearby, watching tiny fish swim between smooth stones. A single leaf floated past. He reached for it. The current carried it away. For the first time that morning he smiled. It was small, almost invisible. But Elara noticed. She always noticed. Far beyond the village, another traveler followed the same river. His black horse moved without hurry. Its rider wore an ordinary gray cloak that hid expensive leather armor beneath simple cloth. No royal crest decorated his shoulders. No guards surrounded him. No one looking at him would imagine that kingdoms obeyed his voice. Kaelin preferred it that way. Power always changed how people looked at him. Fear arrived before conversation. Respect arrived before honesty. Silence arrived before friendship. He wanted one day without any of them. As the village slowly appeared through the mist, he guided the horse onto the narrow road. Children noticed him first. They stopped playing and watched quietly. An old baker offered a polite nod. A fisherman continued repairing his nets. Nobody bowed. Nobody knelt. Nobody called him Alpha. For reasons he couldn't explain. He liked this place immediately. Near the healer's cottage, an elderly woman struggled to lift a heavy basket filled with firewood. Before anyone else reached her, Kaelin climbed down from his horse. "I can carry it." The woman blinked. "You'll ruin your clean boots." "They're only boots." She laughed and handed him the basket. At that exact moment, Elara walked around the corner carrying fresh water. She stopped, looked at the stranger, then looked at the overloaded basket. Without asking who he was, she simply spoke. "If you're carrying wood, carry water too." Kaelin stared at her. 4 years generals had waited for permission before speaking. Council members measured every word. Entire armies moved when he lifted one finger. Now, a village healer had calmly assigned him another chore. For one heartbeat, Oren's voice echoed inside his memory. "No one tells an alpha king what to do." Kaelin surprised himself. He picked up the second bucket. "As you wish." Elara nodded once and walked ahead. The old woman tried very hard not to laugh. Rowan watched everything from behind the cottage door. The stranger looked enormous. Broad shoulders. Eyes. Quiet movements. Yet unlike the slave traders. He never shouted. Never grabbed anyone. Never looked impatient. When an old dog wandered across the yard carrying an injured paw, the traveler immediately crouched to avoid frightening it. The dog sniffed his hand, then happily accepted gentle scratches behind its ears. Rowan noticed every detail. Children who survive fear become experts at watching people. He continued watching. The cottage slowly filled with villagers. One needed medicine for fever. Another carried a child with a scraped knee. Pregnant woman complained about back pain. Elara moved from person to person with patient hands and calm words. The traveler remained near the doorway. Whenever she reached for supplies, he quietly handed them over before she asked. Whenever someone needed water, he carried it. Whenever firewood ran low, more appeared. No questions. No complaints. The old healer smiled. "He follows instructions well." Elara whispered. He's probably afraid of disappointing people. Kaelin overheard every word. Something inside him became strangely quiet. No one had ever guessed that about him. Hours passed. The cottage emptied. Only Rowan remained hidden behind a tall bookshelf. Sunlight slipped through the window and covered old books with warm golden light. Dust floated lazily through the air. Kaelin wandered toward the shelves. Most books described herbs, stars, or forgotten stories. One thin volume caught his attention. The Wolves Who Chose Kindness. Before he could touch it, a tiny hand appeared beside his own. Rowan stood there, still silent, still cautious. The little pup carefully reached into his pocket and removed a small wooden carving. Wolf, poorly shaped, one ear uneven, one leg shorter than the others. He quietly placed it into Kaelin's hand, then stepped back. Kaelin stared at it. His fingers stopped moving. His breathing slowed. Back inside the palace library, another wooden wolf waited alone on a shelf, also carved with one crooked ear. Also imperfect, almost identical. He swallowed. "Did you make this?" Rowan nodded. "It's beautiful." The child looked genuinely confused. Nobody had ever called something he created beautiful before. Slowly, very slowly, he smiled. Late afternoon sunlight painted the village gold. Elara organized old books while Kaelin repaired a broken shelf. Neither spoke much. The silence never felt uncomfortable. Outside children laughed. Wind carried the smell of pine and fresh bread. Rowan sat on the floor arranging tiny stones into circles. Occasionally he glanced toward the two adults. Every time he looked, they happened to be looking toward him. Neither noticed the pattern. The old healer certainly did. She quietly hid another smile. As evening approached, rain began again. Not violent, only soft drops tapping gently against wooden windows. The fireplace filled the room with orange light. Elara prepared herb tea. Kaelin sat on the floor reading one of the old storybooks aloud. His deep voice remained calm and steady. The story described a lonely wolf cub searching the stars for his family. Halfway through the tale, the voice stopped. Kaelin looked down. Rowan had fallen asleep. The little pup leaned completely against his knee. One tiny hand still rested on the page. Kaelin didn't move. Even after the fire became smaller. Even after rain covered the windows. Even after darkness filled the cottage. He remained perfectly still. Because moving might wake the child. Elara quietly returned carrying another blanket. She stopped. The sight before her somehow felt impossible. The quiet traveler who never smiled. Sat frozen for nearly an hour simply to protect the sleep of a frightened little boy. Without speaking, she draped the blanket across both of them. Their hands brushed for the briefest moment. No sparks flashed. No magical force shook the room. Only warmth. Simple. Unexpected. Real. Neither pulled away immediately. Neither understood why. Across the room the old healer looked toward the dancing fire. Very softly she whispered to herself. Some bonds arrive like lightning. And some arrive like the sunrise. Outside, hidden among the trees, two mounted riders watched the cottage. One lowered his hood. The king has found the village. The second rider looked toward the warm light glowing through the window. And the council. The answer came quietly. They're already on their way. Inside the cottage, nobody knew that peace would last only one more night. The fire continued to crackle. Rain continued to fall. And for the first time in many years, three lonely souls shared the same quiet without realizing destiny had already taken a seat beside them. The morning did not begin like the others. It began with a weight in the air that no one could name, but everyone felt. Even the wind over the village seemed slower, as if it had learned to be careful. Elara noticed it the moment she stepped outside the healer's cottage. The road that usually carried the sound of early footsteps and distant chatter was unusually empty. No children running. No merchants calling. Even the birds had gone quiet, perched high and still as if they were watching something unfold below. Inside the cottage, Rowan sat near the hearth, his small hands wrapped around the wooden wolf Elara had once given him. He wasn't playing. He wasn't speaking. He was just holding it tighter than usual, as if the world might try to take it away again if he loosened his grip even a little. Kaelin stood near the window, unmoving. His presence filled the space in a way that felt too controlled for a traveler. His cloak hung loosely, but his posture never relaxed. He had not slept properly since arriving in the village, or perhaps he simply no longer knew how. His gaze stayed fixed outside, but it was not the village he was watching. It was the horizon, as if something beyond it was calling him. Elara sensed the change before it arrived physically. She always did. There were days when healing herbs warned her before illness came. Days when silence in a room meant truth was about to be revealed. This was one of those days. The kind where nothing obvious happens at first, but everything inside you prepares anyway. She tied her hair back slowly, her fingers steady but her mind alert. Rowan's small cough drew her attention for a moment. She glanced at him, then softened her expression slightly. "Stay close today," she said gently. Rowan nodded, though he did not ask why. He rarely did anymore. Children who had learned too early that questions do not always receive kind answers often stopped asking altogether. Kaelin finally turned away from the window. "That feeling you have," he said quietly without looking at her. "It's not wrong." Elara paused for a fraction of a second. "I know," she replied. That was all. No further explanation was needed between them. Whatever stood on the edge of their peace was already on its way. It arrived before midday. The sound of hooves was different from ordinary travelers. It was not the uneven rhythm of merchants or wandering riders. It was coordinated, measured, controlled. The kind of sound that did not belong to individuals, but to authority. Elara stepped outside before they reached the center of the village. Rowan followed close behind her. Kaelin came last, still half hidden under his cloak, but no longer attempting to appear ordinary. Something about the approaching presence had already forced him into a different state. Not panic, not fear. Recognition. 3 riders appeared first, then a 4th, then more behind them, forming a line that cut through the road like a blade through soft cloth. Their armor was not ornate, but it carried the unmistakable mark of council authority. Not pack warriors, not border guards, something higher, something colder. The riders stopped in front of the healer's cottage. The lead one dismounted. He did not look around with curiosity. He looked around with judgment. His eyes landed on Elara first, then Rowan, then Kaelin. There was a pause, brief but heavy, as if the air itself had to adjust to what he saw. Then he spoke. The child known as Rowan. The words were not a question, not even a statement meant for discussion. They were a declaration already decided elsewhere. Elara did not move. Rowan tightened his hold on her sleeve. Kaelin's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained still. The rider continued. By order of the High Council, he is to be surrendered immediately for royal assessment and custody. The words fell into the space between them like something sharp being dropped onto stone. Elara blinked once. Not in surprise. In understanding. So this was it. The thing she had felt coming. The moment where the world decided to take something it never bothered to protect. She stepped forward slightly, just enough to stand fully between Rowan and the riders. "And if I refuse?" she asked calmly. The rider's expression did not change. "Then you will be charged with obstruction of royal decree. Punishable under pack law." There was no emotion in his voice. No anger. No hesitation. Just structure. Law speaking through a man who had likely forgotten what choice felt like. A few villagers had started to gather behind the riders now, watching from a distance. Whispering. Uneasy. Curious. Fearful. Rowan peeked out from behind Elara's cloak, his eyes flicking toward the armored men. His grip tightened, but he did not cry. He simply watched. like he was learning something about the world he had not yet fully understood. Kaelin took one step forward then stopped again. Elara noticed. She didn't look back at him, but her voice softened just enough for him to hear. "Don't," she said quietly. It was not an order. It was a boundary. Kaelin stopped immediately. That small response did not go unnoticed by the riders. The lead one's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are not from this village," he said toward Kaelin. Kaelin did not answer. Elara did. "He's not the problem here." The rider ignored her. "The child is not safe here," he continued. "He belongs under council protection." Elara let out a slow breath. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the decree they had delivered moments ago. She held it up. The seal of the council was visible, heavy and official. For a moment, even the riders seemed to think she would comply. Instead, Elara tore it, slowly, cleanly, right down the center. The sound of paper breaking in the quiet air felt louder than anything else that morning. A few villagers gasped. One rider's hand moved slightly toward his weapon. The lead rider's expression finally changed. "You have just defied council authority," he said, voice lower now. Elara let the torn pieces fall to the ground. "I have just rejected ownership of a child," she replied. A silence followed. Not empty. The kind of silence that waits for someone to break it again. Rowan looked up at her in that moment. Not confused. Not afraid. Something closer to awe. Kaelin, however, was watching her differently now. Not as a traveler. Not as a healer. But as something he had not expected to find in this place. Resistance without hatred. Defiance without violence. The rider stepped forward again. "This is your final warning," he said. "Step aside." Elara did not move. Neither did Rowan. Kaelin exhaled slowly. Something inside him shifted. Not loudly, but decisively. The riders took that as refusal. Two of them dismounted. The sound of armor tightening filled the air. Villagers began stepping back now, uncertainty spreading. Some looked toward Elara. Some toward the riders. Some toward the child standing in the middle of something far too large for his small body. Rowan took a half-step backward instinctively. Elara noticed. She gently placed her hand over his head without looking away from the riders. "It's okay," she said softly. But it wasn't reassurance. It was protection. The lead rider raised his hand. And then paused. Because something unexpected happened. Rowan stepped forward again. Not behind Elara. Not away from danger. Forward. Small uneven steps against stone. Elara turned slightly. "Rowan, stay back." But he didn't stop. He walked until he stood between Elara and the riders. Right in the open. His small hands were empty. His voice was quiet when it came. "I'm here." No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause again. One rider frowned. "What is this?" Rowan bent down slightly. Picked up a small flower growing between cracks in the stone. Dirt still on its roots. He held it out toward the riders. Not offering it like a weapon. Not like a challenge. Just offering. The lead rider stared at it. Confused. Rowan spoke again softly. "It grows here." He turned slightly, looking back at Elara. "She stays here." Then back at the riders. "You came later." The simplicity of it hit harder than any argument could. Because there was no strategy in his words. No politics. Just truth as a child understood it. A murmur moved through the watching villagers. Something fragile began to shift. The lead rider noticed it immediately. His authority was slipping. He straightened. "This discussion is over," he said sharply. "Take the child." The two armored men stepped forward. Elara finally moved then. Not fast. Not aggressively. Just enough to stand fully in front of Rowan again. Kaelin moved at the same time. Not to the front, but beside her. Close enough that his presence became undeniable. The riders hesitated again. Not because they feared him. Because they could not place him. Elara looked at Rowan once more. Then at the riders. Her voice lowered. "If you take him," she said quietly, "you will not leave this village the same way you entered it." The words were not a threat. They were a consequence. Kaelin finally spoke, voice calm but firm. "He is not a resource." The rider looked at him sharply. "He is not yours to decide." Kaelin met his gaze. "No," he said. "He is hers." Shift. Something in the air changed again. The lead rider's expression hardened further. "Then you choose rebellion." Elara shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "I choose him." Rowan looked between them again. Slowly he turned back toward Elara and reached for her hand. She took it immediately. Firm. Certain. The riders stood still for a moment longer. Then the lead rider finally raised his hand again. A silent command. But before anything could happen, something else became clear. The village was not moving. No one was stepping forward to help the riders anymore. Not a single person. That realization changed everything. The lead rider looked at the crowd, then back at Elara, then at Rowan, and finally at Kaelin. Something calculated flickered in his eyes. Not defeat. Assessment. "This is not finished," he said quietly. Then he turned. And the riders withdrew. Not in victory. Not in defeat. But in recalculation. As they disappeared down the road, the silence they left behind felt different. Heavier. More permanent. Rowan held Elara's hand tighter. Kaelin stared at the path they had taken. And Elara exhaled slowly. Because she knew what had just happened. The world had noticed them. And once the world notices something it cannot control, it always comes back to take it again. The day began with a smell that did not belong to the village. Smoke. Not from cooking fires or warm hearths, but something older, harsher, carrying the memory of iron cages and long roads of suffering. Elara felt it before anyone spoke. Standing outside the healer's cottage, she paused mid-motion while gathering herbs. The wind shifted slightly, and with it came a faint, bitter trace that made her stomach tighten. Rowan noticed too. He was sitting on the steps, carving softly into a piece of wood Kaelin had given him earlier. The small wolf shape was becoming more detailed now, almost like it was remembering itself through his hands. But when the smell reached him, his carving slowed, then stopped. Kaelin, who had been watching the horizon since dawn, finally straightened. His expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Something inside him already knew before sound arrived. And then it came. Urgent. Not the calm authority of the council this time, but something sharper, rougher, desperate in a way that did not belong to disciplined soldiers. Elara stood fully now, her instincts tightening like a drawn thread. "They came back," she said quietly. Kaelin didn't answer, because he already knew. Rowan stood slowly, moving behind Elara instinctively. But this time he did not fully hide. That small difference mattered more than anyone understood. The village began to stir as shapes appeared on the road. Not riders of law, not council messengers, but wagons, heavy ones, old ones, the kind that did not carry goods. They carried cages, the same kind Elara had once burned. And leading them was a man she remembered too well. The slave trader. Older now. Angrier now. Scarred not just on his face but in the way he held himself. As if surviving humiliation had turned into a permanent wound he wanted to pass on to the world. Behind him, chained figures sat inside iron frames. Children. Adults. Broken silence. The wagons stopped at the edge of the village. The trader smiled. Not kindly. Not cruelly. But with certainty. Like he had returned to collect something that never stopped belonging to him. "Well," he called out, voice echoing across the square. "I see the healer is still playing protector." Elara didn't move. Rowan stepped closer to her side. Kaelin slowly moved forward. The trader's eyes shifted when he noticed him. Recognition flickered there. Not identity, but presence. Something about Kaelin unsettled him. though he didn't yet understand why. The trader laughed once. "I heard rumors," he said. "A cursed child survived my last visit." His gaze drifted deliberately toward Rowan. The boy did not look away this time. That alone made the trader's smile sharpen. "There he is. I should have ended that little problem properly." Elara's voice was calm, but no longer soft. "You don't get to come here again." The trader tilted his head. "Oh, but I do." He gestured toward the cages. "Because someone keeps escaping my property." The word property made something inside Rowan shift slightly. Kaelin noticed, very subtly, but clearly. The trader stepped down from his wagon now, slowly walking forward. "I heard a healer thinks she can rewrite the rules," he said, eyes locked on Elara. "And I heard a broken child thinks he belongs somewhere other than a cage." His gaze flicked again toward Rowan. "And I heard. Someone in this village believes they can protect what doesn't belong to them." He stopped, now looking directly at Kaelin. "Funny how delusions travel in groups." Silence fell. A heavier silence than before. Because this time it wasn't authority arriving. It was violence returning for unfinished work. Rowan's hand tightened around Elara's sleeve. Kaelin's expression darkened slightly. Not anger yet, but something close. Elara finally stepped forward. "You left once," she said. "You should have kept walking." The trader chuckled. "Oh, I would have." Then he lifted his hand. Signal. The cages behind him shifted. Chains rattled. And one small sound broke through. Child crying. Quiet. Suppressed. Barely alive. Rowan flinched. Just slightly. But Kaelin saw it. That was the moment something inside him stopped being patient. The trader noticed the reaction. And smiled wider. "There it is," he said. "The reaction I always enjoy." He pointed lazily toward the cages. "You see, healer people forget. Pain teaches memory better than kindness." Elara's voice lowered. "Leave." The trader sighed dramatically. "I did leave." He gestured behind him. "And I came back with friends." From behind the wagons, armed mercenaries stepped forward. Not council soldiers. Not disciplined fighters. Men who fought for coin, not order. Kaelin finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight that made even the air feel heavier. "You shouldn't have returned." The trader looked at him again. "Ah," he said. "So the silent traveler speaks." He laughed lightly. "And what are you? Protector? Father? Hero?" Kaelin didn't answer. Because none of those words fit correctly yet. The trader shrugged. "Doesn't matter." He snapped his fingers again. The mercenaries advanced. The first moment of violence didn't come like a storm. Came like inevitability. Elara moved instantly. Not away. Toward the cages. Rowan tried to follow, but she pushed him gently behind a broken cart. "Stay there," she said firmly. Kaelin stepped forward at the same time. Not to defend Elara. Not to protect himself. But to stand between the mercenaries and everything behind him. The first attack came fast. Steel swung. Kaelin caught it with his hand. No hesitation. No effort. Just control. The mercenary stumbled back in shock. And then Kaelin moved. Not like a king. Not like a ruler. Like something far older. The air shifted. The balance broke. One by one the mercenaries fell back. Not because of chaos but because of precision. Every movement Kaelin made ended resistance before it could form fully. Elara, meanwhile, had reached the cages. She pulled at chains with bare hands. The metal resisted. Then Rowan appeared beside her. "Elara!" She didn't look at him. "Help me," she said. And he did. Small hands gripping cold iron. Struggling. But not stopping. Behind them, a scream echoed as another cage shook violently. Inside it, a child pressed forward. Hollow. Still alive. Barely. Rowan froze for half a second. Then moved faster. Kaelin noticed. Even while fighting, that boy was not just watching anymore. He was choosing. The trader watched all of it with growing irritation. "This is pointless," he shouted. Then he reached into his coat. Chain whip. Not ordinary. Enchanted with binding sigils. He cracked it once. The sound alone made the air tighten. Elara felt it immediately. Magic meant control. Control meant suffering. The whip snapped toward Rowan. Kalen reacted instantly. He moved between them. The whip struck his arm. For a second, nothing happened. Then pain flared. Not physical alone, but deeper. A binding force trying to latch onto his energy. Kalen's expression tightened. The trader smiled. "Oh," he said softly. "You're not ordinary." Kalen pulled the chain free slowly. Then looked at him. And something in his eyes changed. The trader's smile faltered slightly. Because now he understood. Too late. Kalen stepped forward. And for the first time, he stopped holding back. The air itself seemed to shift around him. Pressure. Presence. Authority that did not need explanation. The mercenaries hesitated. Just for a moment. That was enough. Kalen ended it quickly. Not brutally, but decisively. When silence returned, the trader stood alone. Breathing harder now. Not from exhaustion. From realization. Elara had opened the last cage. Rowan helped the final child step out. The boy inside collapsed into Elara's arms immediately. Not speaking. Just crying. Quietly. Relief mixed with disbelief. The trader watched this. Something inside him cracked slightly. But he hid it quickly. "You think this changes anything," he said. Kalen stepped forward. Did not feel like movement anymore. Felt like judgment arriving. The trader took a step back. For the first time. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," he said quickly. Kalen stopped in front of him. "I understand enough." Then Kalen grabbed the whip. And broke it. The metal screamed as it split apart. The trader flinched. But Kalen didn't stop there. He turned slightly. Looked at Elara. Looked at Rowan. Looked at the broken cages. Then he said one sentence. "Burn it." Elara didn't hesitate. She took a torch from the wagon. Rowan stepped forward too. This time no one stopped him. The trader's face changed. "No, wait." But it was too late. The fire touched wood. Then iron. Then memory. Flames rose quickly. Not chaotic, but cleansing. The cages that had held lives now turned into collapsing shapes of orange and black. The trader backed away, eyes wide now. "This is madness," he whispered. Kalen didn't look at him anymore. 'Cause he was watching Rowan. The boy stood still as fire reflected in his silver eyes. Not afraid. Not celebrating. Understanding something older than his age should allow. Elara stood beside him. Quiet. Steady. Alive. The trader turned to run. But Kalen stopped him. Not with force. Just presence. "You will not return," Kalen said calmly. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. The trader froze. For the first time in his life. He believed someone. Then he left. Without looking back. The fire continued burning behind them. But this time it was not destruction. It was release. Rowan slowly reached out and held Elara's hand. Then Kalen's. For a moment all three stood there. In silence. Watching chains turn to ash. And in that silence. Something changed again. Not outside. Inside. The fire from the burning cages had long faded into embers by the time silence returned to the village. But silence no longer felt like peace. Felt like anticipation. As if the world itself was holding its breath. Waiting for something buried for years to finally rise to the surface. Elara stood near the healer's cottage. Rowan still close to her side. His small fingers had not left hers since the fire. Not once. Even now, with everything calm again. He held on as if the world might suddenly decide to change its mind. Kalen stood a few steps away. He was different now. Not in appearance, but in presence. Something in him had shifted during the fire. Not power. Not dominance. Awareness. as if something long buried inside him had started responding to things he could not yet name. The wind moved gently across the village square, carrying ash into the distance. And then, an old voice broke the silence. "I have seen that mark before." Everyone turned. An elder from the village had stepped forward. Frail. But his eyes carried memory, not fear. Memory. He was looking directly at Rowan. More specifically, at the faint silver patterns that appeared briefly under Rowan's skin whenever he was emotional. They had been subtle until now. Easy to ignore. But not anymore. The elder stepped closer, shaking slightly. "That marking," he whispered. Kaelin's gaze sharpened immediately. Elara instinctively pulled Rowan closer. The elder continued, voice trembling now. "It belongs to the bloodline of the first Alpha King." A ripple went through the villagers. Whispers began immediately. "Impossible. Lost line. Myth. Dead blood." But the elder raised his hand. "No," he said firmly. "I was there when the royal bloodline still walked openly among packs. I saw those markings on banners, on armor, on newborn heirs." He pointed toward Rowan now. "That child carries it." Silence dropped again. Heavier this time. Rowan shifted slightly behind Elara, confused. He did not understand what was being said. Only that all attention had suddenly turned toward him in a way that felt different. Kaelin took a slow step forward. "Explain," he said quietly. The elder bowed his head slightly. "There was a child," he said. "Born to the Alpha King before the political fracture. Male heir. The last pure successor of the original bloodline. Was, then softer. He disappeared during the rebellion years ago. The council declared him lost. Presumed dead." Elara's grip tightened slightly on Rowan. The elder looked up again. "But that mark, it was not lost." His eyes shifted toward Kaelin now. "It was hidden." Kaelin's expression did not change outwardly. But something inside him tightened. Because for reasons he did not understand yet. The elder's words did not feel like information. They felt like recognition. The elder stepped back slightly. "If that child survived," he continued, "he would carry the silver sigil in his blood. Not as decoration. As inheritance." Rowan looked up at Elara. "Sigil," he whispered softly. Elara didn't answer immediately. Because her mind was moving faster than her voice. Kaelin suddenly took another step forward. Now closer. Closer to Rowan. Closer than before. The air between them felt heavier again. Kaelin knelt slowly. Not as a ruler. Not as an alpha. But as something far more uncertain. A man trying to understand something that might change everything he thought he knew. Rowan tilted his head slightly, watching him. Kaelin's voice lowered. "Do you remember anything?" he asked gently. Rowan shook his head. "No. Was. Only her." He looked back at Elara. That simple answer hit harder than anything else in the room. Kaelin straightened slowly. And for the first time since arriving in this village, he looked unsettled. The elder stepped forward again. "There is only one surviving explanation," he said. His voice lowered. "He did not die." A silence followed. "He was hidden." Elara's expression tightened. "Hidden by who?" she asked immediately. The elder hesitated. That hesitation said more than words. Kaelin spoke again. "Say it." The elder swallowed. "The council." The word landed like a fracture through the air. Even the wind seemed to stop. Elara blinked once. Rowan didn't understand the full meaning. But he understood one thing. People were suddenly looking at him like he belonged somewhere else. Kaelin's face remained controlled. But something inside him was breaking in a way no battlefield had ever caused. "The council," he repeated quietly. The elder nodded. They feared succession instability, power disputes, civil fracture. So they erased him from history. Elara's voice turned colder. "You're saying a child was removed from his own life because adults were afraid of politics." The elder did not deny it. Kaelin stood still for a long moment. Then he looked at Rowan again. Not as a stranger anymore. Not even as a protected child. Something deeper was forming. Recognition that had no name yet. Rowan stepped slightly back behind Elara. His small voice came again. I don't want to go anywhere. That sentence cut through everything. Elara knelt immediately beside him. You're not going anywhere, she said firmly. Kaelin's gaze shifted to her. And something unspoken passed between them. Fear. Not of battle. Not of counsel. But of what truth does when it finally arrives too late. The elder spoke softly now. If the mark is fully awakened, it means he is the rightful heir. Then heavier. The lost son of the Alpha King. Silence returned again. But this time it was different. 'Cause no one corrected it. No one denied it. Kaelin slowly looked away from Rowan. For the first time in his life. He did not know what to say. The wind moved again. Carrying ash. Carrying memory. Carrying something that had been buried too long to stay hidden forever. Rowan reached for Elara's hand again. She held it tighter. And Kaelin watched that simple action. Like it was something more powerful than any law, any council, any crown. Because in that moment, he understood the most dangerous truth of all. Even if blood called the child elsewhere, his heart had already chosen where he belonged. The sky above the capital was too bright for what was about to happen. Sunlight spilled over marble towers and golden banners, turning the royal courtyard into something that looked almost peaceful from a distance. But anyone standing close enough could feel the tension underneath it, like a storm pretending to be still. Every noble house had gathered. Every council voice that once whispered laws in shadowed rooms now sat openly in carved stone seats, waiting. Waiting for the Alpha King. Waiting for the lost heir. Waiting for the moment everything would either return to order or collapse completely. Elara stood at the edge of the great courtyard. She had never been here before. And she did not belong here. That was what every instinct in her body kept telling her. But Rowan's hand in hers kept her grounded. He stood slightly in front of her. His small body wrapped in simple village cloth, the wooden wolf still hanging from a cord around his neck. He looked around with quiet curiosity, not fear. Because children do not understand thrones. They only understand faces. Kaelin stood at the center platform. Not as a traveler anymore. Not as a man hiding identity under silence. But as what he had always been. Alpha King. The air around him was different now. He did not need to speak for people to feel it. Even the council members who once questioned him sat straighter now, as if presence alone demanded memory of power. But Kaelin was not looking at them. His gaze kept shifting toward Elara and Rowan. Again and again. As if something inside him refused to fully stay in one world. The council elder stood forward first. This is the moment of restoration, he announced loudly. The lost heir has been confirmed. A wave of murmurs passed through the crowd. Then eyes turned toward Rowan. The child did not react. He only leaned slightly closer to Elara. The elder continued. By law of blood succession, the heir will be returned to the royal seat and raised under pack governance. Elara's fingers tightened slightly. Rowan looked up at her immediately. That small reaction did not go unnoticed. Kaelin saw it. And something inside him shifted again. The elder raised his voice. Bring the child forward. Then guards began to move. Slowly. Carefully. Not aggressively yet. But clearly. Elara stepped forward instantly. No, she said. One word. Clear. Unshaken. The guards stopped. The council murmured. The elder frowned. This is not a request. Elara did not look at him. She looked at Rowan. Then gently turned him slightly behind her. Stay behind me, she whispered. Rowan nodded. But he did not let go of her hand. Kaelin stepped forward slightly. Not yet intervening, but watching. The elder's voice sharpened. The child belongs to the throne. Elara finally looked at him. "No," she said again, this time slower. "He belongs to himself." A silence fell instantly. Not dramatic, but heavy. Like the courtyard itself had paused to listen. The elder's expression hardened. "Blood does not choose. Law does." Elara answered immediately. "Then your law is wrong." A ripple went through the nobles. Kaelin's jaw tightened slightly, not because she defied them, but because she did it without hesitation. The elder raised his hand. "Enough." He turned slightly toward Kaelin. "My king, the heir must be taken under royal custody." All eyes shifted now. Kaelin. The moment arrived. The decision point. The entire capital waiting for command. Kaelin did not speak immediately. He looked at Rowan, then at Elara, then at the council. And for the first time in a long time, he did not respond as a ruler. He responded as something else. He stepped down from the platform. Slowly. Step quiet. Deliberate. The crowd watched in confusion. Kaelin stopped in front of Rowan. The child looked up at him. No fear. Only recognition that did not yet have a name. Kaelin knelt. And the entire court went silent. Not because of power, but because of choice. He looked at Rowan for a long moment, then spoke softly. "You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to." Then even softer. "Do you understand that?" Rowan hesitated, then nodded slightly. Kaelin stood again, and turned. Not toward the throne. Not toward the council, but toward Elara. The crowd shifted uneasily. This was not expected. This was not in any law. Kaelin stopped in front of her. For a long moment neither spoke. Elara's expression remained steady, but her grip on Rowan tightened slightly. Kaelin looked at her quietly, and for the first time, there was no distance of king and subject between them. Only two people who had walked through silence, fire, and loss together. The council elder broke first. "This is not a personal matter," he snapped. "This is governance." Kaelin did not turn. He spoke without raising his voice. "My son chose his home." The words settled into the courtyard. Then he added, "So did I." Silence shattered. Whispers erupted instantly. Confusion. Disbelief. Elara froze slightly. Rowan looked up at Kaelin. Kaelin continued, eyes still on Elara. "I will not take him from her." Then softer. "She did not raise a heir. She raised a child no one else claimed." The courtyard went still again. Kaelin turned slightly toward the council. "If your law demands removal of love to preserve power," he said, "then it is not law worth keeping." The elder's face darkened. "You are the Alpha King." Kaelin nodded once. "Yes. And I decide what my kingdom becomes." A breath passed through the crowd like a collective realization. This was no longer a recovery. It was a change. Kaelin turned back to Elara. His voice softened slightly. "This is not a command. It is a choice." He looked at Rowan, then back at her. "And I choose both of you." Elara did not speak immediately. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her expression. Not fear. Not doubt of him. But understanding what this meant. A life that would no longer be simple. Rowan stepped slightly forward. Then did something unexpected. He let go of Elara's hand. She looked down immediately. But he only stepped toward Kaelin. Then reached out. And grabbed both their hands. One small hand each. Bringing them together. The gesture was simple. But in that moment, something changed in the air. Kaelin's breath stopped slightly. Elara felt it too. Not magic. Not force. Something quieter. Recognition. The mate bond, long delayed, finally surfaced. Not as explosion, but as truth settling into place. Not loud. Not violent. Just inevitable. Kaelin looked at Elara. And this time there was no distance left between understanding and feeling. The council stood frozen. 'Cause they could see it too. Not with eyes. But with silence. Elara exhaled slowly. And for the first time since everything began, she did not pull away. Rowan smiled faintly, as if he had been waiting for this without knowing why. Kaelin spoke softly. "This is my kingdom," he said. "Oz. And this is my family." The wind moved across the courtyard, but no one moved with it, because something far greater than law had just been decided. Not by council, not by blood, but by choice.